As the government is already quite rightly toughening up prison terms for anyone jailed for a terror offence after the Streatham knife attack, I decided to look at a different aspect of the problem: radicalisation. As he entered his teenage years, Sudesh Aman, the man shot dead by police at the weekend after he stabbed 2 innocent people, used to brag to school friends he was going to bomb them and that he had a grenade in his pocket. A few years later, still in his teens, he was jailed for 40 months for 13 offences, including the possession and distribution of terrorist material. Now, the government likes to boast how children are taught British values and tolerance in our schools. But what about warning of the dangers of radicalisation? As responsible parents, we tell our children to be wary of strangers and never accept a lift from someone they don't know. Isn't it time our mosques were full of warnings to Muslim youngsters of the perils of being radicalised and how it is a perversion of Islam? I'm all for tougher laws and extended prison terms, but perhaps that old mantra of education, education, education should be applied here too.
I agree with a lot of what you've said, and obviously prevention is going to be much easier than cure, because as we've seen, prisons, once you're into the prison system, it's a petri dish for further radicalisation. The conditions are absolutely ideal to make bad men worse, as I think my former Home Secretary once put it. I think it's also important to say that a lot of these young men are mentally ill and they are preyed upon by ideologues. I think it's a tragedy for that young man's family and for him, what happened, and obviously his victims. It's not only Islamic terrorism that we have to worry about. Obviously, it is the largest threat we have, but the fastest growing threat comes from the far right. Doesn't just take away from your point, which I think is an extremely good one. On your point, let's hear the reaction to what's happened from the Muslim Council of Britain.
Mm-hmm. If we really want to tackle terrorism, we have to start at the root. What we don't need are knee-jerk reactions from the government in the aftermath of a terrorist attack, because keeping people in prisons for longer is the definition of counterproductive and will have huge ramifications. Right now, the prison service has failed in rehabilitating those who carry out violent attacks, and more needs to be done to address the ineffectiveness of the system. A Home Office part-funded study found that the best way to ensure these violent attacks don't happen is to create those opportunities, to widen education, to fund youth services, to improve outcomes for the most marginalised communities, to move away from managing risk and vulnerability to managing talent and opportunity.
I wish that message was wider, as your message of education is, and the statistic from Hope Not Hate is that 35% of people think that Islam is a threat to our national life, which is, Islam is a peaceful religion. It's Islamism that's the problem.
I saw Michelle, I think, groan at something you said, and I want to go straight to you because undoubtedly it's a tragedy for that man's family. Sadly, Rachel, you and I are parting company. I don't think it's a tragedy for him. He was stabbing innocent bystanders. Yeah. It doesn't give me any pleasure to say it, but he deserved to be shot.
I say it's a tragedy because he was clearly mentally ill.
Well, Michelle?
Well, so I agree with everything that you said. I take issue with a couple of things that you said, and I think calling these people, dismissing them as mentally ill, I think that's a real disservice to people.
Not saying all of them are.
Well, I think it's a real disservice to people that genuinely are mentally ill. These people are people that make choices. When you look at the particular guy in the Streatham attack, he wrote a list of life goals. His top life goal was to die a martyr and to get to what he calls the afterlife. These are people that value dying with as much energy and enthusiasm as we value living. So that's the first thing. I think it does a disservice to genuine mental illness. The second thing, you referenced the fastest growing threat is far-right extremism. So just to put that into context, that is indeed growing, but it has grown from 6 to 10%. It is absolutely tiny, and the biggest threat by a country mile is Islamist
that's exactly what I
jihadism, and we need to be honest about that and focus, to your point, in the communities as well.
Let's bring Greg in. Greg, let me ask you this. So the race is on now for the government because there are some potential terrorists or terrorist-related offenders who are due out this month. One will have served half of a 4.5-year stretch. He'll still come out in 2 years' time, won't he?
Well, that's the problem, it seems to me. I can see why they're all going to try and stop anyone coming out without serving the full term. but they, as you say, they still come out at the end. Yeah. So there's something. There's only any point doing that if you're doing the other side of it, which is what you're talking about, really. I mean, what is interesting is there were some figures. There is a program called Prevent,
yes, yeah.
which all sorts of, I mean, universities, colleges, everybody, schools, everybody has to refer people to Prevent if they think they're in problems. Of those on Prevent, 44% are actually related to far-right extremism of the people on their courses, and 45% are related to Islamist extremism.
But people are taking the Prevent strategy to court at the moment, aren't they? The government's been taken to court about that because people are saying it unfairly prejudiced the Muslim community. So there's all kinds of complaints around the Prevent strategy.
But as I say, this right, whether it's right-wing or whether it's Islamist, you know, it's, according to these figures, it's about 50-50.
Let's get Alex in on this. The idea that you are sent down, you're going to serve 4 years, but then because of panic or justifiable measures by the government, whichever, suddenly you're not getting out in 2, you're getting out in 4. We've changed the laws almost at the last minute. Fair?
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky part of the issue, isn't it? Because obviously the public are very concerned. It's about keeping the public safe, of course, but there's also an element of the importance of rehabilitating and giving people hope as well. And I do think, you know, going back to the education side of things, I think that's where the key really is. And, you know, for young people,
back up the conveyor belt. What are we going to do? The ones who are already coming out.
Yeah,
you know, if that's back up there. We're here.
And the problem we see with a lot of people who are in prison, you know, for crimes they've committed, that actually they are just as likely, or there's a high percentage chance they'll go out and reoffend, regardless of what the crime is. So clearly, we do need to work on rehabilitation as a whole in prison. So, you know, going in and seeing, you know, why they've been, you know, moved to extreme measures.
Question for Alex.
Yeah, OK, then I've got a solution.
I was in A&E the other day, and I was talking...
Well, I don't know if we need that, really. I mean, we're talking the pledge. No, he doesn't want to see your bum.
There are protocols around dealing with high-risk extremists in the NHS as well. Are they flagged up when you have to treat them or not, or do you treat everybody the same?
We treat, you know, if someone comes in the doors, you know, in A&E, we treat everyone, you know, the same. And, you know, I see quite a lot of violent crime, especially working in London, and stabbings as such, and you have to treat everyone absolutely the same.
But what if you're at risk from them? I mean, you're not told if somebody is violent, maybe...
So if someone has committed any kind of violent act or at the risk of violence, we have a procedure. We get the police involved, and we have, you know, armed police personnel who are there to keep us safe in the department.
Let me go around the table. I think I've got a solution. Anybody remember what an IPP was? I don't expect you to. It was an imprisonment for public protection order introduced by David Blunkett when under Labour government.
2008.
Went out in 2012. Went out in 2012. What it meant was, and this could be far right, it could be far left, you could be Muslim, you could be idiot, you could be anything. If you came to the end of your term, the end of your 4 years, the end of your 8 years, and it was deemed by the parole board that you still posed a threat, you were not allowed out. Now, the parole board, I think we have questions to answer over their conduct over what was John Warboys, now John Radford, the black taxi rapist. But a newly convened parole board, so you do your 4 years, then you appear before them, and then we apply an IPP. You first, but then I'll go around the table.
This is solely for people of terrorist bent?
Yeah, right, left, whatever.
Well, I heard you talk about this on your show this morning. I think it's a really good idea that they have to come up...
to hear your list.
I was. You have to come up before a parole board and a tribunal, and if you're past fit for exit, then you can be let back into society. If not, you're back in. Very good idea.
It was the coalition government that got rid.
Very good idea.
Yeah, I think if you are holding terrorism tendencies, you have no business being on our streets. One of the flaws in the plan is that these people who have these extreme ideologies, they will lie to the parole board because they see no wrong in telling Kafors or whatever they call them that they are sorted and well and they mean no harm. They will lie to those people.
IPPs?
I do think that, you know, at the end of the day, the safety of the population as a whole is the most important thing. So if someone is high risk, then they shouldn't be out on the street.
And you satisfy a tribunal or a board or a judge or whatever. Great.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's what government's going to do now, isn't it? I think it's pretty clear that, I mean, politically, this is quite embarrassing for them. And if you have 2 or 3 more, apart from being terrible for the people who get attacked and the rest, it's politically quite embarrassing. And I think they've got to do something. And I suspect that's what they'll do. They'll make a judgment on saying, is this person safe to release? And if they're not safe to release, then they shouldn't be released.
Indeed. All agreed.